Hello, and welcome to Justice Reinvestment, Understanding House Enrolled Act 1068 and the Potential for Public Safety and Community Well-Being throughout Indiana. My name is Chris Goff. I serve as an Associate Justice on the Indiana Supreme Court. I also serve as Chair of the Indiana Justice Reinvestment Advisory Council, or State JRAC. But before serving on the State Supreme Court, I spent 20 years working in county courthouses, just like most of you. And through that work, I know just how busy you are. I also know how important your work is to your community. And so let me begin by saying thank you. Thank you for making your community safer. Thank you for making your community better. And thank you for taking time to attend today's webinar. Earlier this year, Governor Holcomb signed into law House Enrolled Act 1068, the local JRAC statute. This important legislation, passed unanimously by both houses of the Indiana General Assembly, established a local JRAC in every Indiana county. The purpose of this webinar is to provide guidance on the purpose and requirements of local JRACs. We will review the potential impacts and benefits of local JRAC in relation to your work. We will discuss State JRAC's purpose and its important role to help local JRACs improve public safety and community well-being by implementing evidence-based best practices to achieve better outcomes. We will provide information regarding the first annual report from local JRACs due March 31st, 2022. And finally, we will discuss resources to support local JRAC teams. Throughout today's webinar, you will hear three key themes. First, to keep our communities safe, it is crucial for local justice stakeholders to form genuine partnerships. During my service at the local level, I had the privilege of serving as a drug court judge. Drug court didn't solve all our problems, but it did improve outcomes for a lot of people. And perhaps more importantly, it provided an infrastructure through which our local justice stakeholders gained common knowledge about the system we all worked in, albeit in different roles. By meeting together regularly to discuss issues of common concern, we gained respect for each other as professionals and appreciation for the importance of each other's work. We soon found ourselves talking about more than just our drug court cases. We became interested in and well-informed about our entire justice system and our community. We became genuine partners engaged in making our community better. I know that many of you already have partnerships like this. If you do, congratulations. I know your community is better for it. But please stay tuned anyway, because what my partners and I want to share with you will help you take that partnership to the next level. And if your community is not there yet, stay tuned and be assured, if you want it, my partners and I stand ready to help you get there. The second key theme of today's webinar is this: Indiana's criminal justice system requires strong state and local partnerships. Our state has a strong home rule tradition. Our 92 counties all operate in slightly different ways. This home rule tradition is important. It allows a certain amount of deviation among local practices. Such deviation enables local justice systems to develop in accordance with the needs of their community. But home rule aside, a certain degree of consistency and uniformity throughout the justice system is critically important. And we must all abide by the requirements of the same constitutions, and the deviations that might be allowed within our statutes, administrative rules, and procedural rules are certainly not without limits. For us to understand those limits, we all belong to professional organizations. When I was a trial judge, I served on the board of directors of the Indiana Judicial Conference. That organization, like Popeye, IACAC, IPAC, Public Defender Council, ISA, AIC, and so many others, ensure that Indiana's justice professionals perform their duties in accordance with all professional requirements. They are all examples of state and local partnerships. When appropriate, a local member can utilize the resources of the state organization to meet the needs of their community. JRAC is designed to serve as the ultimate state and local partnership. It creates a statutory infrastructure that will enable dialogue among and between the statewide leadership of every stakeholder group in Indiana's justice system and all three branches of state government, and the leadership of every local justice stakeholder group and all three branches of local government in every Indiana county. This statutory infrastructure creates an unprecedented opportunity for Indiana's justice professionals to exchange ideas and information, conduct training, and target resources where they are most needed. And finally, the third key theme of today's webinar is this: collegiality is a big deal. Whatever role you play in our justice system, your success is critically important to achieving safety and well-being throughout Indiana. And the same can be said of all your colleagues and justice partners. Treat them with collegiality. We live and serve in a difficult time, and because we live and serve in a difficult time, collegiality is even more important. If we do not treat each other with dignity and respect, we discredit the entire system in the eyes of those we have been called to serve. This is the first in a series of webinars we are hosting to help acclimate our local justice partners to JRAC. Information about additional webinars will be forthcoming. The substantive portion of today's webinar is in two parts. The first section will explain how JRAC fosters public safety and community well-being in Indiana. The second section will explain the requirements of local JRAC. To begin our conversation, let me introduce my friend and colleague, Mark Spitzer, Judge of the Grant Circuit Court. Judge Spitzer is a pioneer in Indiana's JRAC and EBDM movements. He regularly serves as faculty for the Indiana Judicial College, providing statewide training to all Indiana judges. Today, he will explain the history and purpose of JRAC, and he will explain the concept of evidence-based decision-making, or EBDM, and both of their importance to the JRAC movement.
I'm Judge Mark Spitzer from Grant Circuit Court in Grant County, Indiana. It's my privilege to serve not only as the judge of the Circuit Court in Grant County, but also to serve on the Justice Reinvestment Advisory Council at the state level. I'm the Indiana Judges Association representative. One of the things that I can talk with you about is the genesis of JRAC. And so the genesis of JRAC started with an ambitious idea from the National Institute of Corrections called the Evidence-Based Decision-Making Initiative. In 2010 or 2011, the National Institute of Corrections came up with an ambitious framework for decision-making in the criminal justice system. After developing that framework, they solicited local jurisdictions to apply to be a pilot to implement that framework. The Evidence-Based Decision-Making Initiative was built on a number of different assumptions. And one of those was that as people move their way through the justice system, that every contact with that individual is an opportunity for behavior change. Also, that decision makers in the justice system work best when they work collaboratively, particularly when they're thinking about things like policy change, improvements to the system. Another principle was that if you are making decisions about the system, that you can make those decisions based upon what we know in terms of what the research has taught us about how to implement behavior change and how to structure the system correctly. And then finally, if we collect data about the work that we do, if we study that data and respond to that data, then the system is going to improve over time. We in Grant County thought that those principles were both impressive and workable. And so we applied for that evidence-based decision-making initiative. And we were one of 7 jurisdictions throughout the United States that were selected to participate in that process. The idea really was to try and achieve system alignment through evidence-based practices. In other words, using evidence-based practices at every stage of the system, from arrest to release from supervision. And so we began to implement those ideas as we looked at our justice system locally. We also invited the state in as part of our team. There came a time as we worked through a process that National Institute of Corrections had another great idea, which was, let's try this at the state level. Indiana was interested, made that application, and became one of the states who were selected to participate in that evidence-based decision-making initiative. Representatives of Grant County came to the table and to share our experiences, and then we reached out to the state agencies as well, the stakeholders at the state level, to participate in the evidence-based decision-making process. All branches of the state responded, put together a team. We came up with ideas in terms of how system improvement could happen. We took on some big projects like the pretrial release project, data analysis, improvements to probation, community corrections. What we learned there was that collaborative system that had worked at the local level also works well at the state level. We're able to break through those silos that we're all used to in the system, get together and talk and work proactively to achieve change. Once we began to see some success with regards to what was really kind of an informal team, the General Assembly decided that it would be beneficial to make that more formal. So legislation was passed and the Justice Reinvestment Advisory Council was created, with membership that was specified by statute in terms of who was going to be on council. And it was interdisciplinary across all of the branches of government. Supreme Court has taken a lead as well. That's how I became to be on the council as the Indiana Judges Association representative. Again, efforts continued to be pursued to improve the systems. We saw successes from that. The General Assembly realized the benefits that can occur when we have everybody at the table as we look at change to the system. Just this last legislative session, the General Assembly determined that pushing that back down to the state level from the federal level would pay dividends. And so under the 1068 legislation, then there was created a local JRAC council in every county. Those same objectives that we started with back in that EBDM back in 2010 and 2011. Let's get all of the stakeholders to the table. Let's do an analysis of our system. What changes need to be made? We know that now there's a new way to do pretrial. That's, for example, there's a way that we can do that. Let's talk about that. We have a problem with jail overcrowding. Let's do an analysis of that as well. We need to collect data, kind of see how we're doing business. Are there other opportunities where we need to make changes locally that we can talk about, get everybody around the table and make those decisions? One great thing about collaborative decision making is that you don't violate what I consider to be the most important law in the criminal justice system, which is the law of unintended consequences. When we don't have everybody at the table talking, then sometimes we don't realize that we've made a change that's going to impact somebody else. I like to think of the justice system as kind of a spider web, where if you pull on one strand of the spider web, it pulls all the other strands of the spider web as well. So you need to be aware that when you're pulling on that one strand, that those other strands are going to be affected. If we've got everybody at the table who can talk about how that one pull on that one strand is going to affect their side of the spider web, then we're more likely to avoid those unintended consequences. We're more likely to get informed knowledge about how the system works and how improvements can be made. And then we can identify where there are some needs. Perhaps we need to apply for grants. Perhaps we need to talk about sort of restructuring a budget, things like that. All of those can occur when we're all sitting around the table talking about change. Now, this has worked really well since 2011 in Grant County. We've made a number of different and significant changes in our system. Those have been lasting changes as a result of our evidence-based decision-making approach. Some examples are implementing prosecutorial diversion for felony cases, implementing an evidence-based pretrial system. We have a family recovery court in our county that has been adopted as well. We have looked at our probation system and determined that we needed to change how we allocate caseloads. We needed to change how we respond to behaviors. Our behavioral responses are more in line with what the research says is effective. So we've made all sorts of different changes since 2011 to the Grant County justice system. And all that has occurred because we're all sitting together at the table and talking through it and making those changes. Look, change is difficult for everybody. We know that with change comes resistance. We know that with change comes questions of why. We know that even when people are on board with the change, that there are going to be growing pains as we work through things, that there are going to be some things that come up with regards to the change that we're making that perhaps we didn't think all the way through and that we're going to need to work through. But the way that change can happen most effectively is if we're all working on it together. We're all on the same page, and we have an agreement in terms of how to move forward. And that's what the intention is with House Bill 1068. In your county, in your own community, make you the agents of change. Bring everybody together to the table so that you can effectively be agents of change together. You know best what your community needs. You know best how to implement what we know about the research into your own individual system in a way that the change will be embraced and will be most effective. You can work through that advisory council to achieve that change that you need to make in your system. If systems remain static, the rest of the world around us is going to change. We're going to fall behind. And frankly, we've seen that with our justice system over the years. It's time to make some changes in the justice system. And we're expected to be those agents of change because we own those issues. Our society has moved forward and we haven't responded to that. This is a good way to do that. Well, certainly change is never easy. I would encourage each of you in your communities to embrace this opportunity to be at the table when you're making those changes and to be part of those changes and to bring your level of expertise, your knowledge that you know as part of the system to make those changes in your community. I think it'll pay great dividends. I think you'll get great satisfaction out of it, and your community will be the better off for it. Thanks.
Thank you, Judge Spitzer. And now let me introduce my friends and justice partners, Bernice Corley, Executive Director of the Indiana Public Defender Council, and Chris Naylor, Executive Director of the Indiana Prosecuting Attorneys Council. Both Bernice and Chris have gained the trust and respect of their entire profession, and they both epitomize collegiality and professionalism. Today, they will share their perspectives on the benefits of state JRAC.
Your agencies have been a member of state JRAC since it was established. How long have each of you been in your current role as JRAC members?
This is Bernice Corley. I've been in my role for 3 years.
Yes, I've been in this role for 2 years, since 2019, but also participated in some JRAC meetings and committee work, probably going back to 2016.
Great. Okay, from your perspective, what has been accomplished as a result of state JRAC?
For me, I think the emphasis on data-driven pretrial has been most impactful, specifically pretrial representation funding, training of pretrial staff that will be doing pretrial supervision, I think has been really important, especially since most of them, their experience is post-conviction supervision. And the validation studies, I think, have been really meaningful. I think it shows a real commitment on the part of the Supreme Court and stakeholders to be certain that what we're doing is data-driven and being effective. So all of the above has really worked together to improve pretrial fairness and equity.
Yeah, generally speaking, I think state JRAC, we've established a reliable, consistent forum for all stakeholders to work together, to identify challenges and pursue improvements. Specifically, I echo what Bernice has said about data. I think through our discussions, we recognize the need for meaningful data. And I think we're close to a breakthrough with a statewide system, but that's really important that we pursue data-informed decisions. I think another positive outcome has been Recovery Works and the funding that's gone into Recovery Works, although it's a stopgap funding. I think that's been a great benefit. So I think the state JRAC has provided direct resources to counties wanting to learn more about evidence-based decision-making practices. And it's kind of been on a volunteer basis, state JRAC members, but I think that's been very helpful. I would also want to highlight the 2019 bail and pretrial report that was released just before the pandemic, but a lot of work went into that report. It provides a nice roadmap for action steps that we should pursue moving forward, resources needed.
So how has JRAC impacted your work so far?
From my perspective, echoing what Chris has brought up, what I love about it is it's brought all of the disciplines that touch the criminal justice system together. It's broken down silos and shown us that we can work together to solve issues and make improvements without sacrificing our individual functions, which are critical to a balanced criminal justice system.
I agree wholeheartedly with Bernice. We've had the opportunity to share insights and to gain a better understanding of all perspectives. We've taken this integrated approach to work towards consensus and find consensus. We've worked together to make Indiana a better and healthier place to live.
So what future impacts do you envision as a result of this level of collaboration among state stakeholders?
I think the possibilities really are endless. I think so long as we hold to the foundational principles that all the stakeholders that participate, do so in good faith, are open and honest in discussions, I don't think there's any topic that we can't take on and make better and do better together. Specifically, I think the area of behavioral response and risk reduction strategies really is an area I'd love to see us dig more into and roll out in a meaningful way such that it literally impacts cases so that we see a smaller number of revocations on community supervision.
I think Indiana does stand out among other states in the way that we've collaborated on this system review. And I think moving forward, we need to best determine how can the state be a resource to local communities. As we've talked about, silos have been broken down at the state level. I know local communities have been working together. How can we best build this communication with state JRAC, local JRAC as we move forward? And not from a perspective of additional statewide mandates, but how can the state help where technical assistance may be needed? How can the state help local communities highlight needs and areas of concern? Can there be some a statewide gaps analysis to determine where the state needs better resources? And also at some point, we need to do a better job of measuring outcomes so we can best determine what policies, practices are working and try to replicate those, and what policies and practices may not be working. And so we can best use our resources in making Indiana a standout in the Midwest and nationally.
Thank you, Bernice, and thank you, Chris. Let me next introduce my friend and justice partner, David Bottorff, Executive Director of the Association of Indiana Counties. David represents all of Indiana's county commissioners and county council members. He has been a trusted justice partner in Indiana's JRAC movement since its inception. Today, he will share his perspective on the benefits of local JRAC.
Hello, my name is David Bottorff. I'm Executive Director of the Association of Indiana Counties. And we supported the enactment of House Bill 1068, which created the local JRACs. We thought it was important because we had seen the benefit of the statewide JRAC. We witnessed the benefits of the coordinated effort between criminal justice partners at the state level. They helped identify trends in the criminal justice system, and they sought common solutions. And we thought this could be a benefit at the local level as well. And oftentimes, the largest expenditures from county budgets are dedicated to public safety, such as funding of the courts, prosecutor services, public defenders, jails, probation, and other criminal justice and public safety programs. We need to make sure there's a coordinated effort at the local level to maximize taxpayer dollars. House and Road Act 1068 allows the local JRACs to identify the issues that are important to their community. They can do that through creating a new local JRAC board, creating a multi-county board, or even using the local community corrections boards that are already in existence. So we urge county councils and commissioners to appoint dedicated individuals to the local JRACs and make sure they report back to their respective appointing bodies and to the public so they can identify challenges in the criminal justice system and help find the solutions. Thank you for participating in this webinar.
Thank you, David. Let me next introduce my friend and justice partner, Brett Clark. Brett serves as sheriff of Hendricks County, and he has been honored by his colleagues by being elected to serve as president of the Indiana Sheriff's Association. Like Judge Spitzer, Sheriff Clark is a pioneer in Indiana's JRAC and EBDM movements.
Well, thank you, Justice Goff. I appreciate the kind introduction and words. As he said, I am the Hendricks County Sheriff and this year's president of our Indiana Sheriff's Association. Now in Hendricks County, where I live, we have a real tendency to raise our hands and have piloted many of the programs we're still working on, like the EBDM group, pretrial reform, JDAI, and others. One thing that I've observed is that by bringing our local groups together with some direction and purpose, it opens up a whole new line of communication that has really elevated us to another level, because it has sort of forced us to develop these better working relations, if you will, with our counterparts that hadn't existed before. What might have started as an EBDM group or pretrial group meeting sort of grew into this means to solve other problems as they came up, and has forced us to think about the long-term goals for our county. And the beauty of that is because we'd already developed those relationships that we can make it work. Everyone tells you the time to build relationships certainly is not in the middle of the storm. It's before you need them. And I think that is what this has given us an opportunity to do. Now, the goal of all this, remember, is not to create busy work or force you to meet just to meet. We really believe that these efforts can have a real impact on not only the business of today, but the future in your respective areas. Having determined some local change targets at home and relaying that information to the state group will help them help you reach your goals. This can be accomplished with things like the collection and aggregation of data, targeted grant funding, and even technical assistance when needed. Our hope is to standardize some of the reporting requirements so that there might be more consistency in reviewing and monitoring your local outcomes. Those outcomes can then be shared with our courts and our state legislators so everyone can see what is working and even what isn't. Then decisions can be based on real evidence, not just hope or good intentions or perceptions, but real data. State group will also have the ability to keep the locals aware of what is going on in other areas. Hopefully they can showcase some of the good efforts that are working, because really sometimes we just don't know what we don't know. But being able to see what success looks like will allow us to improve across the board. I believe this kind of multidisciplinary membership of both your local and the state groups will bring a broader perspective to these kinds of conversations. Just like the judge said earlier, if you think about what a judge might do in a decision, or the probation department related to things, or even the sheriff when it comes to things like how he runs video court or transports inmates, that might have a ripple effect on the entire system. By thinking through some of those ripples before they happen, all of us can benefit and make better decisions. Now, this part I was a little reluctant to even say, but let's be honest, sometimes some of the biggest challenges that we deal with come down from the state via legislation or audits or administrative rules. But I think this framework is designed to try and help reduce some of that frustration and maybe remove what we as locals might see as barriers to make the entire system more functional. Remember, nothing is a magic bullet and it will not be easy, but it is a start. This is a piece of the puzzle that can help get Indiana to the front of this line in terms of leading on some of these issues that we are all facing. Now, the beauty of these state and local partnerships is that everyone will have the ability to add to the conversation. This is truly home rule in action, because at the end of the day, no one knows your local community better than you. So my hope is that you will come at this with an open mind and in the spirit of cooperation, in which each of you the very best in this journey that we are going on together. Thanks for your time and for listening.
And now we will shift our conversation to the requirements of local JRAC. Please let me introduce my friends and justice partners, Troy Hatfield, Assistant Chief Probation Officer, Monroe County Probation Department, and President of the Probation Officers Professional Association of Indiana. Amber Finnegan, Executive Director of Jefferson County Court Services and President of the Indiana Association of Community Corrections at Counties. And Kristen Bonchbach, Director of Community Corrections at Indiana Department of Correction. Troy, Amber, and Kristen have all been instrumental in the development of our technical assistance for local JRACs, and they also epitomize collegiality and professionalism.
Thank you, Justice Goff. So I want to talk to you a little bit about who should be on your local team. House and Road Act 1068 gives you an outline of the people that should be there, and these are the minimum these are the people that should be at least on the team, but you can choose to add more based on your local circumstances and what you feel is going to be best. At least you need to have the chief public defender, and we're in counties that have a chief public defender. If not, then a public defense attorney who practices that could be appointed by your local public defense board. And if you don't have a local public defense board, then it's going to be a public defender who practices that's appointed by the circuit court judge. Other members will include the elected prosecutor, your community mental health center director, and this is generally going to be your local community mental health center that director over the mental health center that receives county tax allocation funding. Other than Lake and Marion counties, each county should have one community mental health center. Some counties share your community mental health center, but you shouldn't hesitate to add others if it's or multiple providers to your team if they provide services to your local criminal justice population, and it makes sense to do so. Again, this is your local council that'll tackle local issues. So add members as it makes sense. Other members of your team should be your county sheriff, your community corrections director in counties with the community corrections program, your chief probation officer, the president of your county executive, the president of your county fiscal body, and a circuit or superior court judge exercising criminal jurisdiction. If there's only one in that jurisdiction, then that judge serves. If there's more than one, then a judge selected by the majority of the judges in the county with criminal jurisdiction would be the one serving. Now, all representatives of a local JRAC by statute can have a designee to attend the local council meetings, except the judge. That is the only one that doesn't have the option to send a designee. Your local JRAC's team, once it's established, will annually elect one member as a chair and one member as vice chair. And your local council shall meet at least quarterly. Now, some of the other people that spoke before me talked about advantages of local JRACs. And there are many advantages to having a wide group of perspectives like this on your local team. It's going to promote collaboration among your criminal justice partners and branches of government. The statute was very purposeful in designating the members of the local JRAC to help promote that collaboration on a local level, help provide some institutional knowledge from those criminal justice partners and branches of government. It'll provide a forum to help challenge some assumptions in a respectful manner. One of the things that we want to do is to promote the use of data to inform our decisions. And using that data will help us challenge a lot of different assumptions that we may have of things that are going on in our local criminal justice system. Additional advantages, having this team will help solve some complex issues, such as the ones that our local JRACs are going to be asked to discuss and work on. And you're going to hear about some of these duties later on, and these aren't going to be easy tasks for us locally to do and to tackle. We'll learn from each other's experiences and the challenges that each team member faces. And hopefully, we'll be able to identify and overcome some of those barriers that we might have or perceive that we have very quickly. There's also going to be challenges in working with a group like this. And there's challenges in establishing a team. There's just difficulty in getting started. Calling our first meeting, assigning that chair and co-chair. I would suggest getting started right away if you haven't already formed your team. There's only one member who cannot have a designee appointed to the team, and maybe that's the place to get started, to start calling people together and getting moving. Some other challenges: designating support staff for meetings. There's going to be things to do, agenda, meetings, minutes to keep about your meetings, where you're going to meet, just organization in general. But establishing and designated staff to support those meetings is going to be a challenge, but it'll be tremendously helpful to do that as soon as you can. Some other challenges might, the goals of the team members may differ from time to time. It is many of the justice system partners and others gathering at your local community that often have different goals. But the challenge is there to find common ground and where you can work on issues that you can all agree upon. There may be some limitations to create change based on your position and duties. And this kind of goes back to the idea of designees versus having the decision makers at the table. You really want to try to have those people at the table who are very knowledgeable about the duties of your organization and the structure that you have and the challenges that you face, but you also want someone who's going to be able to communicate effectively with that local council and also take back what is learned back to the people that you represent. Some other challenges might be that the decision-making process might be delayed without some clear goals, objectives, and timelines. You really need to, once you get started and get moving, is figure out exactly what you want to do, how you're going to get there with your objectives and when you'll do it, and setting some clear timelines and goals that you have. And lastly, some personalities could be a challenge, but some view this as a challenge, but it can be an excellent challenge to have. You want people on your team that are going to be optimistic cheerleaders. You want people on your team who routinely find flaws in some of the problems or issues that you're discussing, or solutions that you're discussing. And you want people who are going to be workhorses. All of that mix of personalities create an excellent team and an excellent framework for moving things forward. But I'd recommend setting some ground rules and some operational procedures for those meetings to help you get through those challenges.
All right. If you're trying to figure out where to start on forming your local JRAC team, it's not essential to start something totally new. The purpose of the local JRACs is not to add another meeting on top of everything that you're already doing, but to look at how your community can work more effectively to align practices that increase public safety and community well-being. So each jurisdiction will need to determine which structure works best for them. Most communities have a local policy team in some fashion, with many of the same members already in place. So these could include your community correction advisory boards, local coordinating council, evidence-based decision-making policy teams, criminal justice leadership teams, or justice partner teams are just a few examples of those. House Enrolled Act 1068 did indicate that the local community correction advisory board could assume responsibility of this council. So in a future webinar, we're going to get into more detail about how that could work, but that may or may not fit within your community. But if you don't know where to start, the community correction advisory board or an existing policy team is a good place to start to have that conversation on what is going to work best for you. If you could go to the next slide, please. Some considerations for determining if a new policy team would be a better fit would be asking these different questions. Do most members identify in the JRAC statute attend an existing policy team like the ones that we mentioned in the previous slide? Are the topics of other issues or policies related to local criminal justice policies and practices? Some examples of this could be, is your community building a new jail? Is it looking at developing a residential facility? Is it looking at implementing a new pretrial system? Is it looking at implementing a problem-solving court or new practices derived from the work within the sequential intercept model? So looking at those different topics, and would there be an overriding council that could best assist with those? Another third consideration would be to determining if voting members serving on existing policy teams may be those identified in the JRAC statute. So do you already have committees within your community that have similar members with similar voting responsibilities? So if you don't have any of those, a brand new policy team might be the way that you go. But next slide. For those of us that do have an existing policy team, some advantages of doing that would be that different policy teams have the same membership participation or requirements. So it may make sense to combine them into one committee. In combining those teams, of course, it decreases the number of meetings that are required by those members. We all know that we attend a lot of meetings, so cutting down on the number of meeting obligations that we have for all of us can result in more productive meeting outcomes and also save time for our members. There's also just this vast share of wealth of expertise among members of these existing policy teams. These people have a lot of different conversations in different aspects of the community, and they have very specific knowledge in each one of their fields and can be real assets to one thing. So if we can have all of those committee and expertise into one existing policy team, they know what's going on within their communities, and they're the ones that can make the best decisions on what is right for them. Also, a lot of these existing teams have a large amount of data or reports that are currently required to whatever entity that they're going to. So it could be we could look at what existing data do we have and share those amongst stakeholders, and what projects could we do next, or just at least starting conversations as to where we want to do for improvements. We could also use these reporting templates and data matrix, and we could expand those to other parts into the criminal justice system to look at our system as a whole and how one affects the other. So next slide, please. So some disadvantages of using a policy team, and like I said, we're going to have another webinar that's really going to get into the weeds of this, but just in general, meeting agendas and notes would need to be really clear on what topics are addressed by the local JRAC and the voting members, and what is the other policy team's decisions. So for example, if I use my Community Corrections Advisory Board as a local JRAC team, there are specific things that the board needs to do. So those notes would need to be very clear that this is a Community Correction Advisory Board decision versus what is a JRAC decision. Also, members need to navigate conflicts and the ability to vote under each authority. So, for example, on a Community Corrections Advisory Board, the Community Corrections Director does not have a vote, but in local JRAC, they do. So it would be these stakeholders getting together and learning and having bylaws and rules as to how to navigate those conflicts. And of course, having some existing policy teams may have a large number of members, which can sometimes make it difficult to get decisions made and projects moved forward. So thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Kristen Bonchbach, and I'm the Director of Community Corrections for the Indiana Department of Correction. Our division primarily oversees the Community Corrections and Justice Reinvestment grants, as well as the Community Transition Program, or CTP program. And I just wanted to briefly clarify our role and relationship with this project, as there is some crossover, especially with Community Corrections Advisory Boards. So first and foremost, what's the difference between a Community Corrections Advisory Board, or CCAB, as I have it in the table, and a local JRAC, and how do they relate? So while structurally the relationship of a CCAB and a local JRAC will vary locally, the purposes are statutorily separate and distinct, even when it's going to be the same people in both groups. And what a local JRAC does is it connects community corrections supervision, their programs, initiatives, and aligns it with the Community Corrections and Justice Reinvestment grant funding within the local criminal justice system. So it functions the same at the state level. For me and my team, I look to the Justice Reinvestment Advisory Council at the state level to keep me informed of what's going on new funding sources, their recommendations for standards and available funding for not only the programs that I oversee, but also the programs that I don't. And prior to 1006, and most certainly not intentionally, we operated separately, as my grants were my grants, and we focused on our area of authority. Judge Spitzer mentioned earlier about the criminal justice system being a spider web, and sometimes there's unintended consequences. For us, when we expanded our programs as a result of 1006, we tried to apply the same principles of best practices for community corrections across all of our new programs, because that's what we knew. And a small example of that would be problem-solving courts. There's already established national best practice for those programs, and they already provide state agency data. And this happened with several of our new grant programs where we weren't the subject matter expert on. If we knew then what we knew now, it would have saved us a lot of time and effort on new policies, new data, new reports, and we could have spent more time focused on service instead of reinventing an already working wheel. And that's what this connection and collaboration is all about. We tried to collaborate even before we were statutorily mandated, and the reality is we could have been better. And there wasn't a formal mechanism to do so. Many community corrections advisory boards have gone above and beyond just looking at their silo and their area of oversight, and were and are a true collaborator within their criminal justice system. And my sense is a lot of those boards that were already doing that are the ones that are going to be utilizing that same policy team for local JRAC. There's also many community corrections advisory boards who are trying to focus on their operations of community corrections and may need more technical assistance or more resources for their area of service. And those advisory boards are the ones who have made or are going to make the decision to hone in on their craft and focus on their strategic plan in partnership with a separate local JRAC. So an example from my own personal perspective is I have my hands full just with my day-to-day job. I would love to be to sit in on a lot of other task forces within the criminal justice system. I've got a lot of initiatives of my own and within the department. I simply just don't have the time to participate in everything and learn the ins and outs of every criminal justice program. We have other designees and areas of expertise within the department, and they can provide their information, and through our channels of communication, I can learn about what's going on through them, so I'm not stretching myself too thin. So each locality will have to assess on what's best for them, and I recommend using the guidance that Troy and Amber have already gone over and provided earlier. With that being said, my role is to make sure that the area that I oversee is in alignment with other state programs and initiatives. So local JRAC isn't a specific IDOC initiative, but I am actively involved as there's crossover with my stakeholders. And there's a huge opportunity to expand resources to save my team time and money. At this time, there's nothing specifically that ties my funding to local JRACs, but through local JRACs, you can create cost savings to reinvest funding. Thinking about the very principle of justice reinvestment, which is just taking cost savings and reinvesting those savings into new or expanding programs, the more that I can streamline efforts within my stakeholders and strengthen our partnerships, the more funding I can free up. For example, next year, I have 206 grant programs that in total require 7,815 pieces of documentation at minimum as part of the grant requirements. And that's a lot of paperwork. And the more paperwork that I have, the less time we have to focus on service and providing technical assistance. I mentioned problem-solving courts earlier, so I'll use them again. I collaborate regularly with IOCS's Angie Hensley, and we work together to see how we can merge our grant requirements into one. Is there a way to just have one financial report, one data report, et cetera? It's easier on you locally, and it's also easier on us as we're not collecting as much as we would have normally. And that doesn't happen without collaboration. In addition, if you're familiar with our grants, it requires a collaboration plan by statute, and that local JRAC is really putting that collaboration plan into action. The sole purpose of the collaboration plan is to reduce duplication of services. The same level of thinking of reviewing processes and evaluating reports that are coming in and requirements at my level applies to the functions and the duties under the local JRAC. So they've mentioned there's going to be future webinars that'll go into more detail on functionality, but in general, it's really using that team to ask, are we seeing the outcomes that we want in the criminal justice system, or are we a revolving door, or do we even know? How do we find out? What does our data say? What does our research say we should do? What resources are available to help us? And what programs are giving us the most bang for our buck? It takes a lot of collaboration to figure those answers out. Just like, and I know you've heard a lot of analogies today, but just like if we were to, we had a street light out and it caused a car accident. If we just look at the person involved in that car accident and we remove them, but we don't replace that street light, can we realistically to expect to never see a car accident again? Probably not. But if we fix the street light, can we expect a car accident to still never happen again? No, probably not. We can't just zoom in on one piece of the puzzle that we know about to get a full picture of the problem. And it's not any different when looking at the criminal justice system. Can't just focus on community corrections or just focus on the arrest piece. It's really looking at each element to figure out the why and the how. And that's why it's more than just the Community Corrections Advisory Board. So I hope that helps solidify some of that relational piece for you. I look forward to my continued participation with this initiative and appreciate you all taking the time to learn more today.
Thank you, Troy, Amber, and Kristen. And finally, let me introduce my friend and colleague, Mary Kay Hudson. Mary Kay serves as the Executive Director of the Indiana Office of Court Services. Mary Kay is a national leader in justice reform initiatives, and she has been instrumental in Indiana's participation in JRAC and EBDM. Today, she will provide instructions regarding the local JRAC annual report.
Thank you, Justice Goff. Good afternoon, and thanks to all who are participating in the webinar today. My name is Mary Kay Hudson, and I'm the Executive Director for the Indiana Office of Court Services. And I'm honored to serve as the Office of Judicial Administration's representative on the Justice Reinvestment Advisory Council. Today, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some of the statutory requirements or duties assigned to the local or regional advisory councils. You've heard about some of them today, and I want to talk specifically about the reporting requirements that some of you may be aware of that are listed in the statutes. So generally speaking, under 3338 9.5-6, the duties of local and regional advisory councils are to review, evaluate, and make recommendations for local criminal justice systems and corrections programs, including pretrial, probation services, behavioral health services, community corrections, and county jail services. And what I want to say about that is that this really highlights some of the comments that have been made before about looking beyond community corrections, looking beyond some of the more traditional programs that we have in our communities, and really expanding our perspectives and views, and looking at prosecutor diversion programs and pretrial services and problem-solving courts, and really linking up our criminal justice partners so that we're communicating and collaborating and seeing the best outcomes that we can have for our community as it relates to our criminal justice initiatives. Some of the more kind of intimidating aspects of the local JRAC statutes are, we acknowledge some of the reporting requirements. As they're listed in the statutes, they're fairly general. And so I want to provide a little bit of information of what we at the State Council envision for some of the upcoming reporting requirements. Specifically, under the statutes, local JRACs are required to compile reports regarding local criminal sentencing as directed by the council, and then also required to submit an annual report to the advisory council no later than March 31st the following year. So with those two reporting requirements, we've had some conversations as the State Council, and I want to talk to you a little bit about what the State Council's responsibilities are and our commitment to you as we make requests of you as local JRACs in those reporting requirements. So here's a list of the State Council responsibilities relative to us providing you with plenty of notice, information, and support about what we will be asking from local JRACs on the reporting requirements. The first thing is that we will provide sufficient notice to local JRACs regarding any information that we're going to be collecting. We realize that this is a new initiative. We realize that you have a lot of commitments and requirements happening at the local level. And we realize that the last thing that you need is a last minute request for data and information. So we will be as forthcoming and transparent as possible when we are asking for information. We do recognize that occasionally we'll get requests from members of the Indiana General Assembly, particularly around the legislative session. So there may be times we may call upon you for specific information about what's happening in your community. But in terms of the annual reporting requirements, we pledge to give you sufficient notice of those. Specifically for 2021, we will be providing templates and information on those reporting requirements very soon. There will be a template for the 2021 data reporting requirements available in December. And what that will primarily consist of is really a report out from local jurisdictions on some of your local practices around collaboration, programming, and data collection. And if counties are able to submit that information to us, then we will count that as their 2020 reporting requirement. And then also we will use that information as a basis for developing some technical assistance opportunities for counties who are interested in seeking state support for developing their local JRACs and initiatives surrounding their local JRACs. We also commit as a State Council to acquire data and information from state level or centralized data sources when possible. That is becoming an increased reality now that we have the supervised release system that's used in many jurisdictions and community supervision, as well as Odyssey being deployed in almost every county or every court in Indiana. And we're also looking at some new initiatives surrounding development of a jail management system and other jail data initiatives that we think will assist with some of these data collection efforts and relieve some of the burden locally. We also will work with your local councils to identify key performance measures, and those may be statewide performance measures that we ultimately ask all local councils to report. But we could also work with you as you develop local initiatives to determine where you may be looking to make improvements in your local system and how you can measure those outcomes. I think Chris had mentioned that he is particularly interested in the research capabilities and some of the efforts that we can assist you, the locals, with at the state level to determine what's working in our communities, how can we replicate effective programs, and what data do we have to support these outcomes. So through that, we will commit to working with you on local research and initiatives. We've done that, for example, with the pretrial release project. We've worked with a number of counties on research initiatives surrounding pretrial. We have partnered with, our office has partnered with counties on problem-solving court research. And so JRAC is committed to continuing those activities with your partnership. And then finally, kind of generally speaking, as the state council's responsibility to the local jurisdictions, we will assist you with reviewing your policies and assist you in developing and implementing evidence-based practices within your local jurisdictions. That's really the whole essence of the Justice Reinvestment Advisory Council. And that's part of why when we at the State Council talked about the idea behind developing local Justice Reinvestment Advisory Councils, so really we could be in communication with you all. We could provide you support where you needed it in the way of technical assistance, training, and even funding when that becomes available. So generally speaking, all of the information that you provide to us, we fully intend to take that information and use it to support other communities, to support your jurisdictions, and to really assist us in making sure that we have appropriate level resources that are allocated to our local criminal justice system. So thank you for your time. I'm going to turn it over to Justice Goff for closing remarks.
Thank you, Mary Kay. And thank you again to all of our faculty members and to all of you, our local justice partners. Welcome to JRAC. As we begin our work together, please remember the key themes from today's webinar. Remember the importance of genuine local partnerships. Remember the state and local partnerships you are already a part of, and think about how you can use this new state and local partnership through JRAC to improve safety and well-being in your community. And finally, remember the importance of collegiality as you undertake this important work. Thank you for all you do to make your communities safer and to make Indiana better. Each of you has a critical role to play as we partner to make Indiana safer and to increase well-being in our communities. I look forward to working with each of you. And finally, let me remind you that additional webinars will be conducted. Webinar 2 will illustrate various models of local collaboration and offer an additional opportunity for Q&A and discussion. Webinar 3 will offer a more in-depth discussion around state-local communication and partnership, the assistance that is or will be available to local JRACs, and enhancements on the horizon, which we expect to include the development of a one-stop shop for streamlined and incentivized funding through our local JRAC website. This concludes our formal session.